energy policy has been an absolute disaster. So effectively, to cut a long story short, and this began under the Rudd Labor government, just after the global financial crisis, Australia made the silly decision to basically allow to open the East Coast gas market. So just to put this into perspective, Australia is the world's biggest exporter of liquefied natural gas. So we are the Saudi Arabia of gas. And on the East Coast, the former Rudd Labor government basically allowed effectively a handful of companies that control Australia's East Coast gas supply to build these ginormous gas terminals in Gladstone without any requirement that they reserve gas for domestic use. And effectively, we've got to this situation where around 80% of Australia's East Coast gas is now exported overseas. Most of it goes to China. And they've created these ginormous gas shortages on the East Coast. Now, what that's done is that's pushed the price of gas through the roof, and it's also stoking inflation. And gas is a key price setter for electricity. So the East Coast Australia is the only exporting jurisdiction in the entire world that does not reserve gas for domestic use. We do it on the West Coast. So the West Coast has a separate gas market. And the Western Australian government, the Carpenter government in the early 2000s, was sensible enough when they set up their market for export to basically force the companies to reserve 15% of their gas for domestic use. And what that's done is that's effectively capped gas prices on the West Coast in Western Australia at a low rate. And it's meant that Western Australians pay some of the lowest gas and electricity prices in the world. By contrast, here in the East Coast, because we export all our gas, we've created all these shortages, and that's pushed the price of both gas and electricity through the roof. So it's a complete policy failure. It started under the former Labor government. The coalition didn't do anything about it. Unfortunately, the war in Ukraine kicked off early last year. And what that's done is it's created a global gas shortage, and it's basically left Australians exposed because we're now on the East Coast linked to the international market. And that's the reason why you've seen these ginormous, it's the main reason why you've seen these ginormous increases in your gas and electricity prices if you live on the East Coast. And that's fueling inflation and obviously causing not just cost of living concerns, but it's forcing the Reserve Bank of Australia to hike interest rates higher, which is then hurting mortgage holders. So, energy policy in this country is an absolute disaster. And it's the main problem is the gas market, but it's also obviously where we've effectively, shut down all the old forms of, we're shutting down the old forms of power generation and then trying to go the renewables approach, which is fine, but you need the gas to effectively backfill it. So renewables don't always work. Like, so if the wind's not blowing, the sun's not shining, you need some form of storage, and we don't have that storage. So what it means is that when you don't have the renewables, you need to be able to fire up gas to provide the electricity to the country at a cheap price. Unfortunately, we've made that super expensive, so that when you need that firming power, when the renewables aren't providing enough power, our energy prices have skyrocketed through the roof, which is why we're paying so much money. It didn't have to be this way, but unfortunately, a series of policy failures, starting with the Labor government under the Rudd-Gillard era, has put us on this catastrophic energy situation.